It started with barbecue smoke and backhanded compliments. The kind of evening where laughter masked expectations and everyone already had a role they expected you to play. Mine was the aimless older sister, the one still chasing ideas instead of careers, the one who never quite lived up to the Quinn name. While my younger sister Vanessa floated through the gathering like the sun itself, polished, praised, perfect, I lingered by the edge of the fence with a paper plate of ribs and a silent smirk. Not because I was bitter, but because I knew something no one else did. Tomorrow morning, my little sister would walk into a glass-walled conference room resume, in hand heels clicking with confidence. She would be nervous but ready, expecting to meet the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the region, Brightforge Analytics. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I would be the one waiting on the other side of that table, not as a receptionist, not as an assistant, but as the founder, the CEO, the woman they never quite saw coming. This is not a revenge story. There are no yelling matches, no dramatic takedowns, no viral exposés. This is something else. It's about what happens when you build something in silence, not to hide, but to focus. It's about being overlooked for so long that you stop needing recognition only for the world to finally turn and ask, wait, that was you. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, brushed off at reunions, or felt invisible in rooms where your story mattered, this one's for you. I'm Rachel Quinn, and this is the day they found out. The scent of mesquite smoke and sugar-glazed ribs drifted lazily through the air, curling around the patio like a memory you couldn't quite shake. It was the annual Quinn family barbecue, an event built on paper plates, overcooked burgers, and a careful social choreography where everyone knew exactly who they were supposed to be. My dad flipped steaks with the same precision he once reserved for engineering prototypes. My mom moved from table to table like a campaign manager, listing everyone's latest accomplishments as if preparing a holiday newsletter in real time. My role, I was Rachel, the quiet one, the girl who tried her hand at too many things and never quite landed. No matter how many years passed, I was still the art school dropout in their eyes, the sister who didn't have a LinkedIn headline worth boasting about. Vanessa, on the other hand, glowed like a hometown hero. She had just wrapped up an MBA from Stanford, and my mother couldn't wait to tell everyone. She's interviewing with Amazon, she whispered loudly, as if Vanessa's job prospects were a family inheritance. My aunts clapped. My uncles nodded in approval. I sipped my lemonade and smiled more out of habit than joy, because I knew that in this moment, invisibility wasn't about being unseen, it was about being seen through. Not ignored, but miscast, reduced, quietly dismissed by people who thought they knew me best. I've learned that sometimes the deepest cuts don't come from enemies. They come from the people who hand you a plate of ribs and a side of small talk while quietly writing your story for you. That night I listened as they celebrated Vanessa's ambition, not realizing that just a few miles from here, my name was etched on the office doors of a company they couldn't stop raving about. It's funny, isn't it? The way people hold onto their version of you like a childhood photo they refuse to update. But I wasn't angry. Not really. I had chosen to build quietly, knowing this moment would eventually arrive. And now, it was closer than ever, because the next morning my sister would walk into the interview of her life, completely unaware that the person she'd have to impress was me, and that I knew would change everything. Let me tell you how we got there. The funny thing about family gatherings is how power plays show up in the smallest details, like who gets asked to carve the brisket, or who gets seated nearest to grandma, the unspoken place of honor, or in my case, how your mother announces to a patio full of cousins that Vanessa just might be the first executive in the family. She said it with pride, the kind of pride that fills a room and leaves no oxygen for anyone else. I just nodded, balancing my paper plate and watching the sauce pool into the potato salad. This wasn't new. I'd spent years listening to these micro moments of comparison disguised as conversation. The time I was working 3 freelance jobs and my uncle asked, "So when are you getting a real career?" Or when I won a design award for an app and my mom responded, "That's cute. Vanessa just got published in the Harvard Business Review." It's not that I didn't want them to be proud of her. I just wanted them to stop acting like pride was a limited resource. Looking back, I've realized this is a common story, especially for women who don't follow traditional paths. If your success doesn't come with a degree or a cubicle, people don't know where to file it. They put it in the drawer labeled, "Still figuring it out." And once you're in that drawer, it's hard to convince them you've outgrown it. That night, I saw it again, how easily they all accepted the image of me they'd built years ago. No one asked what I was working on. No one wondered where I'd been traveling or who my clients were. Because to them, I was still Rachel the free spirit, the family wild card, and maybe part of me let that story persist longer than I should have. But all that was about to change. Tomorrow would be the moment that drawer they kept me in could no longer hold the truth. Because paper plates may be flimsy, but real power, has a way of holding its shape. The thing about LinkedIn is, it's like a stage. Everyone's trying to perfect the role they think others want to see. Buzzwords become props and titles turn into costumes. I've seen it all: visionary strategist, growth hacker, innovation ninja. But sometimes behind those carefully curated job titles are little lies no one talks about. Not malicious lies, just polished half-truths, dressed up as ambition. Vanessa's profile read like a startup investor's dream. Global business thinker, product optimization leader, digital transformation specialist. It was well written, too well written. I knew because I helped her edit parts of it back when she was struggling to land internships. She had the right logos on her resume: Amazon, Deloitte, McKinsey. But the path to those places had been paved by connections, not cold applications. Our uncle worked at Deloitte. My father's best friend pulled strings for the summer program at McKinsey, and yet none of that ever came up in her career journey story. Meanwhile, I had built BrightForge Analytics from the floor of my apartment, bootstrapped the first contracts, coded the first prototypes myself. But you wouldn't know it unless you dug beneath the surface because, unlike Vanessa, I didn't have a network of people telling my story for me. And here's the lesson I've learned: sometimes the loudest titles come from the quietest experience. And sometimes it's the other way around. That night, while she was showing Dad the press kit she made for her interview, I was reviewing the final shortlist from HR. Her name was on it, of course, but not at the top. What struck me most wasn't that she applied it, was that she had no idea I'd be the one reading her application. She didn't even know that BrightForge was mine. And in less than 24 hours, that little oversight would rewrite everything. Vanessa's resume was immaculate, formatted with crisp margins, bullet points that hit all the right buzzwords and brands that sparkled on the page. But to me, it read like a group project where everyone did the work except the person who got the most credit. I didn't need to read between the lines. I'd watched those lines being written over the years. Her summer at Deloitte, arranged over drinks between our uncle and a former colleague. The Amazon internship secured through a networking dinner hosted by Mom's alma mater. Even her product development consulting role was in truth a short-term gig assisting on a pitch deck for a friend's startup. To the outside world, it looked like a meteoric rise, but I knew the scaffolding that held it all together. It wasn't necessarily wrong, it just wasn't earned in the way people assumed. And honestly, that's more common than we admit. There's a whole layer of invisible privilege in so many careers. A well-placed recommendation here, a friendly referral there, it doesn't make someone unqualified, but it can blur the lines between experience and exposure. The problem is, when you're used to being handed a foot in the door, you forget how to knock. And BrightForge didn't just look at resumes we pressed. We asked the uncomfortable questions. We probed deeper, because in tech, ideas are easy to decorate with words, but execution, that's harder to fake. So when I looked at Vanessa's resume through the lens of a hiring manager, not a sister, I saw red flags: too polished, too curated, too rehearsed. And I knew that unless she had more substance than what was on that page, she was in for a long morning. Still, I didn't interfere. I didn't remove her from the candidate pool or warn the hiring panel. I owed her the dignity of discovery, however that looked. The truth, after all, doesn't need defending. It just needs time. By 8:15 a.m., Vanessa had already charmed the front desk, commented on the artwork in the lobby, and taken a perfectly posed selfie in front of our etched glass logo. Her caption read, "Future Executive at BrightForge. Let's see what fate says." She looked confident, poised, and ready to conquer the day. But interviews at BrightForge weren't about confidence, they were about depth. We design our interview process like a lens, zooming in closer with each round. The first round was with Mia, our strategy lead, a quiet thinker who listens more than she speaks. Vanessa spoke fast, eager, rehearsed. She had answers but not insight. She repeated frameworks like slogans, but when Mia asked how she'd handle a cross-functional impasse between engineering and product, she blinked, then circled back to a generic response about leveraging synergy. It didn't land. Next came Dev, our product director. He's not big on fluff. He asked her to walk through a product she admired and how she'd improve it. She picked Spotify's safe choice, but her suggestions were mostly aesthetic: change button colors, simplify layout. No user pain point analysis, no behavioral insight. Dev noted that down. By the time she reached our head of operations, Vanessa's voice had started to shake just slightly. The mask hadn't fallen, but it was slipping. When asked to tell a story of failure and how she grew from it, she gave the kind of answer I'd heard 100 times before I worked too hard. Sometimes I don't know when to stop. The humble brag. Classic. Here's the thing about curated personas, they work until the questions get real. Until someone asks what you've built, not just where you've worked, until someone cares less about your polish and more about your problem solving. And still, I waited upstairs reviewing notes and sipping my tea. I wasn't rooting for her to fail, but I wasn't going to bend the rules either. She wanted to join Brightforge, and today Brightforge would meet her fully. Next up was me, and this time no amount of buzzwords could soften the landing. She stepped into the room like she always had, head high, smile set, shoulders back. The kind of entrance Vanessa had perfected since debate club in high school. But this wasn't a classroom podium or a panel of polite professors. This was my office, my table, my name. Well, the version of it was on every wall in brushed steel RQ Lynn. She hadn't connected the dots yet, not until I turned around. "Please have a seat, Miss Quinn," I said not unkindly. She nodded, folding herself into the leather chair across from me, with studied grace. "Thank you for making the time, Mr. Lynn," she replied. I paused, then smiled gently. "Actually, it's Miss Lynn, Rachel Quinn Lynn." Silence. Just for a second. Then the understanding rushed in like a flood. Her eyes darted to the plaque on the desk, to the awards on the shelf, then back to my face, familiar, yes, but redefined. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't gloat. I didn't lean forward with a smug grin. I let her sit with it. The reality that the sister she'd dismissed, the one she once offered to help get an admin role, was now the CEO she'd hoped to impress. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. "I thought," she whispered, "you were just freelancing, consulting." I tilted my head. Did anyone ever ask, or did you just decide? It was a small question, but it held years of weight. Years of assumptions, of laughter at my expense, of family dinners where my silence was mistaken for surrender. Here's the truth. No resume can show you. It's not the job title that defines you. It's what you've built when no one's watching. And I had built everything in that room. Vanessa's mask cracked, not shattered, not yet. But the edges had begun to splinter. Her voice wavered, her composure bending under the weight of realization. I knew what was coming next. The defense, the bargaining, the backlash, and maybe even the blame. But first, she'd have to hear the rest. Because this meeting wasn't over. Not yet. Her voice finally came back, not loud, but tight. "So, all this time, you let us believe you were just drifting." Her eyes were wet, but her tone sharp, almost accusing. "You tricked us." I didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed this part in my head 1,000 times, but I never imagined it would sting this much. "I didn't trick anyone," I said calmly. "You all made your own assumptions. I just didn't correct them anymore." It's a strange thing how silence can look like deception when people realize they never really listened. I wasn't hiding. I just stopped offering explanations that no one seemed curious about. When I tried to talk about machine learning projects, Dad glazed over. When I mentioned launching Brightforge, Mom changed the subject to Vanessa's thesis. Eventually, I stopped sharing, not out of spite, but self-preservation. Vanessa shook her head, the confidence unraveling. "You should have told us. Told me." Would it have mattered, I asked? Or would it have sounded like another one of Rachel's weird ideas? We sat there in that big silent office, her grappling with who I'd become, me quietly grieving all the times I tried to matter. And here's the truth. I hope more people hear sometimes the real betrayal isn't lying about success. It's never being asked what success even looks like for you. We tell kids to dream big, but only if those dreams fit into neat categories: doctor, lawyer, executive at someone else's company. Not builder, not risk taker, not the one who went off script. Vanessa looked down, her voice small. "Are you going to tell Mom and Dad?" I smiled faintly. "No, but you will. You'll tell them everything, including how the interview went." The door clicked shut behind her with a finality I hadn't anticipated. Not angry, not triumphant, just quiet, like the closing of a chapter you never knew you were writing. I stood there for a moment, the city stretching wide beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, my reflection superimposed on the skyline. For the first time that morning, I exhaled, not out of relief, but release. Within the hour, my phone lit up with messages. First came Mom. "What kind of cruel game is this? Rachel, Vanessa is devastated." Then Dad, "We raised you better than to embarrass your sister like that." Their words didn't surprise me. In their eyes, I was the one who crossed a line, not the one they crossed over time and time again by pretending my efforts didn't count. That's the thing when people build a version of you in their heads, they get upset when reality challenges it. It's easier to believe I staged some elaborate revenge than to accept they simply didn't know me. Not because I was hiding, but because they never looked. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself or explain the interview process or remind them she wasn't even close to qualified. I just placed the phone face down and turned back to the work that mattered. Because now, finally, I had stopped needing their approval, and that's a line worth repeating. You don't owe explanations to those who've never made space for your truth. What came next wasn't revenge. It wasn't even redemption, it was just visibility. The kind you don't chase. The kind that arrives when you've outgrown invisibility. And a few months later, it arrived wrapped in glossy magazine pages. Right there on the cover. Me, no initials, no shadow, no disguise, just Rachel Quinlan. And the world finally saw what they'd chosen not to. 3 months passed. No more barbecues, no group calls, no just checking in text from mom. Silence thick and unfamiliar, not from distance, but discomfort. I wasn't the family's secret anymore. I was the unexpected rewrite in a story they thought they'd finished long ago. And as much as they tried to carry on, something had shifted. Then came the magazine. Forbes, the silent success. How one woman built $1 billion AI company while her family looked the other way. My face on the cover, no initials, no cropped silhouette. Just me, in a crisp navy suit, hair pinned back, eyes steady. Behind me, the bright forged skyline shimmered like a quiet crown. I didn't add a note. I didn't text a link. I simply had 10 copies sent, one to each family member, hand-delivered. That was enough. The article didn't sensationalize anything. It just told the truth, how I'd built Brightforge from a one-bedroom apartment in Tempe, how I signed my first client at 1 a.m. over a shaky Zoom call, how I went from freelancer to founder without ever changing who I was. It talked about sacrifice, late nights, failure, and faith. But most of all, it told the story no one at home ever bothered to ask. Aunt Louise texted first. I had no idea, Rachel. We're all so proud of you. Then Uncle Mitch. I always knew you had something different in you. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because the replies weren't the point. Here's what I've learned. Validation earned in silence carries more weight than applause begged for too early. But there was still one more message left to send. Not in print, not online, something I'd say myself out loud, to the camera, to the people still building in the shadows. That came next. I filmed the message on a quiet Sunday morning. No makeup team, no production crew, just me, a cup of coffee in my home office filled with little reminders of a long, quiet climb, framed patents, the first signed contract, a candle that once lit the darkest, loneliest nights. I didn't write a script, I didn't rehearse, I just spoke. Hey, if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, your classmates, your coworkers, this is for you. If you've ever sat at a dinner table and smiled through a compliment that wasn't meant for you. If you've ever felt like the invisible one while everyone else got the spotlight, trust me, I see you. Because I lived it. I lived the silence, the doubt, the late night pep talks whispered only to myself. I lived the phase where still figuring it out felt like an insult. And I lived the moment they finally looked up and realized I'd been building something real the whole time. Here's what I know now. Real success doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't demand attention. It just works. Quietly, relentlessly, until it's undeniable. You don't have to prove anything to people who never cared to understand you. Build for yourself, grow for yourself, and when the world finally notices, good. But if they never do, that's okay too. I close the video with a simple invitation. Drop a comment below if you've ever been counted out. Tell me what you're building in the dark. Not for revenge, not for applause, but for your own peace. Because the truth is, some of us were never meant to be the loudest in the room. We were meant to be the ones who change it silently, completely. And when our names finally make it to the door, that's when they'll listen. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or told your dreams were too vague, then you're not alone. This channel is for the quiet builders, the late bloomers, the ones crafting success behind closed doors. Drop a comment and tell me, what are you working on in silence? Who are you becoming when no one's watching? If you felt even a flicker of truth in this story, give it a like. It helps this message reach someone else who needs to hear it. And if you're building something real, hit subscribe. Not for the noise, but for a community that finally gets it. Because success doesn't always come with a spotlight. Sometimes it just needs the right room to echo in.